This reflection is going to be on Francis Bacon and holy war. When we think of holy war, the question often is what do we mean by holy war, and war against who and from who? Francis Bacon has often been misunderstood, misaligned, confused in terms of interpretations, yet he was one of the great thinkers of the late 16th century, early 17th century. Bacon was born in 1561 and died in 1626. And so he's living at a very significant period of Western culture, civilization, and where the West would move into the future. I'll lightly land on 5 holy wars he was engaged in, and hence the significance of Francis Bacon for then and for now. The first holy war to reflect on in his time, as in our time in some ways for many, is the threat of Islam. In the late 15th, 16th, and 17th century, the West was very much engaged with the threat of what they saw as an imperial form as Islam coming into the West, undermining Christianity, undermining Western civilization. So then what was the role and responsibility of Christianity generally in terms of resisting this growth of Islam as it was coming into Europe? Now, most thought, of course, as Christians, then the enemy is Islam. Bacon's question is, should our holy war, in this sense he embodies, reflects, in some ways echoes Erasmus, who was just before him in terms of the Christian journey in relationship to Islam. Is Islam the enemy, really, and should that be the focus of committed Christians? How should Islam be viewed in relationship to Christianity? The standard Orthodox position was Islam is the problem, Christianity is the answer, therefore the holy war should be launched against Islam theologically, militarily, politically. Was this Bacon's position? No, he argued that the war that has to go on has to go much deeper, has to be more significant, has to be more profound. So he's not going to go in the direction of the holy war against Islam, of which many of his contemporaries and peers would have thought he should have done. But in our time, there is this tendency, certainly since 9/11 before, to see the real threat to the West as Islam. It's not that Bacon ignored that particular question. He argued the wars have to go a little deeper if we're going to deal with holy war. The second then holy war he dealt with was those who only emphasized the Bible as the source of authority and a very limited understanding of the Bible as a source of authority. Bacon, coming from a tradition of general revelation and common grace, argued the classics embodied immense wisdom, the world of Homer and Hesiod and Plato and Aristotle and Cicero, Seneca, and these significant thinkers, not only the Hebrew tradition, but in fact, there was wisdom in the classical tradition. So one need not to pit Jerusalem against Athens. In fact, there was immense insight in both the Jewish tradition, and there was a great insight within the classical tradition. So for him, the issue was not Jerusalem versus Athens, Bible versus classical philosophy. It was, what is the wisdom in both traditions that can be illuminated for us as civilizations we move into the future? So the second holy war he waged against was the biblicists and their limited interpretation of the Bible, their understanding of God, and the way they would demote, deny, or demean the classical tradition itself. So this would be the second war, and you get the same way of thinking in Erasmus. In one of his early books, it was called Against the Barbarians. One would think, well, geez, he's challenging the Goths, the Visigoths, barbarians who weren't religious at all. The barbarians for Erasmus were Christians who had a very limited understanding of how the Bible is to be read, how it is to be applied, and the antagonism between the biblical understanding of insight and the classics. And so for Erasmus, in this sense, Bacon is building on Erasmus yet once again in his approach to where the holy war is to be launched. So this is now, it's against, initially one would think as he teases and toes people into the, must be against Muslims. For Bacon, no, the real war is increasingly so about a form of infantile Christianity that pits Islam against Christianity, classics against the Bible, Athens against Jerusalem, very polarized either or way of thinking. The third holy war he launched against, because Bacon was Lord Chancellor of England, just as Thomas More had been previously. So here's a form of a holy war against those who saw the state as necessarily evil. The state was problematic and society was the answer. We get this in divide between conservatives and liberals today. One cannot trust the state. If you push it further, it's totalitarian. It interferes with our rights, our liberties, our freedom, our individuality. And so we get this split between those who see the state as the problem and society or the individuals as the answer. Bacon is going to launch a holy war against that very simplistic understanding of how the good is delivered via the state and society in terms of a just, peaceful way. We might also argue an ecological way in our time. So again, the holy war is not against Islam per se. At an intellectual level, it's against a simplistic, almost Sunday school's version of Christianity that pits the Bible against classical civilization, or has a very simplistic view of how the Bible is to be read. Also this form, and he was really engaging, like Erasmus and Richard Hooker was later, engaging a form of Puritanism, who had what they saw was a return to the Bible and then a particular interpretation of the Bible. And so the authority of the Bible and the interpretation becomes a double authority, or what we call deuterocanonical authority. There's only one interpretation of the text, and this is how it is to be done. This is the Puritan approach versus a much more nuanced read of how the polyphonic nature of biblical interpretation through the mothers and fathers of the church, the Middle Ages. And this, once again, is where you see Erasmus very, very much, particularly in his great work of 1518, 1519, the Ratio, which highlights the different genres of the text and how one has to understand multiple genres in reading the text. So Bacon, once again, raises the question in political sense, why does state have to be opposed to society, as if the one is the problem and the other is the answer? So another holy war being launched. The fourth would be, he's been very much seen as the forerunner of an attitude towards nature, raping nature. His Novum Organum has been often interpreted as something in which, here's the forerunner of someone that has led to our ecological crisis today. And in that sense, Bacon, again, once again, is misread. For Bacon, living in the 16th, 17th century, where nature could be brutal, there was a variety of viruses, diseases, Black Death. Thousands, millions of people have died. And then you have physical nature, which imposes on the body itself as nature, which can lead to terrible deaths, floods, famines, fires. And so the question is, let's not demonize nature, but certainly don't idealize nature, because nature can be destructive, as Shakespeare would say, nature red in tooth and claw. So what's to be the relationship of humans engaging nature so that nature itself doesn't destroy humans? How are we to interact thoughtfully with the natural world without, on the one hand, mastering, destroying it, on the other hand, idealizing it, on the other hand? And so Bacon is, one sense, launching a war against those who would simplify nature, idealize it, romanticize it. But he would also launch a war against those who would just see it as an object to exploit for the purpose of profit and wealth, and the captains of industry. So it's this via media that he's walking in regards to nature. And as I mentioned again, one has to be very careful that Bacon is not misunderstood, particularly elements of those who are involved in the ecological movement. They see Bacon as really the foundation, a thinker in terms of nature as an object we have to control, we have to master, we have to use for profit and wealth. And so this is certainly not Bacon's position, but he's often interpreted as that particular. Now, the fifth war that, interestingly enough, that Bacon is launching, which he sees as the Holy War, is in fact the war against Christians. 16th, 17th century, as Protestantism fragmented like rabbit warrens into a multiplicity of denominations, and then these denominations became aligned with states, and states would align themselves with particular denominations. Out of this come the terrible religious wars of the 16th, 17th century. And like Erasmus previously to Bacon, the issue is this really Christianity? Where Christians, in fact, are turning on one another, viciously, violently, going to war, killing one another, all in the name of Christ, all in the name of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So for Bacon, particularly in this advertisement touching a holy war, the question that Bacon is raising, which offended many Christians at the time, it's an amazing dialogue, a very sophisticated, nuanced dialogue between people from a classical tradition, from a Jewish tradition, from a Christian tradition, reflecting very, very much on what is the nature of Christianity and what are the serious problems of a version of Christianity in which Christians turn on one another violently. They shoot and kill one another. Rhetorically, they turn on one another. Christians belong to different militaries and states, and in the name of true Christianity, they kill one another. So the real war that Bacon is arguing for is a war against a divisive form of fundamentalist Christianity, tribal Christianity, in which Christians turn on one another in terms of articulating and trying to embody a pure Christianity. So when we think of Bacon and holy war, then there's five elements. Then there's initially what seems to be holy war against Islam, and that's what many in the 16th, 17th century thought Bacon would be addressing. But for him, that's very, very much on the edges of what a holy war is. At the end of the day, this fine little book is really Bacon launching a holy war against Christianity in a form of Christianity. Then a very crude notion of holy war, Christians are gobbling one another up, destroying one another in the name of Christ. And for Bacon, the holy war really has to be against this type of aggressive, fundamentalist, militant Christianity in which Christians are destroying, killing one another. And he's pleading for a higher ethic that transcends the tribalism of denominational Christianity, in which the understanding of Christianity has shrunk to tribal, clannish, denominational interests, and then in the name of Christianity, they violate the very nature of who Christ actually is.